There are hundreds of hidden details buried inside Elden Ring that most players walk right past, and this video is going to take you through all of them, one by one, for the next 8 hours. Before I move forward, I'm counting on you to support my channel by clicking that tiny subscribe button so that we can spread these amazing videos to folks like you around the world. Thank you. So, a quick word before we get into it. I put this video together because I kept noticing things in Elden Ring that nobody was talking about in a calm, collected way. Most videos are fast, loud, and cut together in 30 seconds. I wanted something different, something you could actually sit with. When I was assembling this, I made a deliberate choice to go roughly geographical, moving through the lands between almost like a traveller would, starting at the edges and working inward toward Lanedale, and then down into the deeper layers. I also chose to leave out some of the more well-known references, things like the obvious Dark Souls callbacks, because I wanted to focus on the details that feel genuinely surprising. What you're going to hear tonight are observations, suggestions, and one possible reading of what From Software hid inside this game. None of this is definitive, it's interpretation. And I think that's what makes Elden Ring worth spending 8 hours on. Let's begin. 1. The first thing worth noting is that the tutorial cave in Elden Ring, the Cave of Knowledge beneath Limgrave, contains a coffin that the player character sleeps in before the game truly begins. This mirrors the sarcophagus imagery found throughout the lands between, and one possible reading is that the Tarnished doesn't arrive in the world, so much as they wake up inside it, already buried, already forgotten. 2. The messages left by other players in the tutorial are almost universally gentle. Phrases like "try attacking" and "good luck ahead." The game seems to have designed this space specifically to allow the community to function as a kind of collective welcome. From Software almost certainly anticipated that players would write encouraging notes here, and built the first cave around that expectation. 3. The fog wall at the end of the Cave of Knowledge tutorial is the only fog wall in the game that doesn't lead to a boss. It leads to the open world. This suggests that From Software wanted to treat the transition from tutorial to the lands between as a threshold moment, not mechanically different from walking into a boss fight, but emotionally much larger. 4. The first enemy you encounter after leaving the tutorial is a soldier who is asleep. You can walk past him, you can kill him while he sleeps, or you can wake him and fight him properly. This is arguably the first ethical test the game presents, and it does so without any dialogue. 5. The stranded graveyard, where the tutorial takes place, sits below the Stormfoot catacombs. If you look at the map carefully, the two locations are stacked almost vertically. The Tarnished begins their journey literally underground, beneath a dungeon already full of the dead. 6. Limgrave's eastern cliffs contain a series of ruins that, when viewed from above on the map, form a rough crescent shape. This isn't explicitly pointed out by the game, but the crescent appears frequently in Elden Ring's iconography as a symbol associated with Ranni and the moon. Whether the ruins were placed deliberately or not, the shape is there. 7. The Tree Sentinel, the Golden Knight on horseback who patrols the first open field of Limgrave, is technically beatable from the very first moment of the game. He is placed there not as a gatekeeper, but as a measuring stick. The game is asking you, without words, how far along you are. Most players learn to read that question over time. 8. The Storm Gate, the narrow pass leading towards Stormvale Castle, is lined with the bodies of Tarnished who didn't make it. The visual language here is borrowed from real battlefields and historical sieges, where the narrow approach to a fortress would become a killing ground. From Software likely studied this when designing the path. 9. Margit the Fellowman, the first major boss of the game, uses a weapon in his second phase that isn't listed anywhere in his item drops or the game's weapon compendium. The golden hammer he conjures from light appears to be made of the same substance as the Erd tree itself, which suggests Margit has some relationship with the Golden Order that his dialogue alone doesn't fully explain. 10. Margit references countless heroes who fell before the player, which points toward the idea that many Tarnished have attempted this journey and failed. The lands between is littered with their remains. Every wandering spirit enemy in the game could, under one reading, represent a former tarnished who gave up and lost their purpose entirely. 11. Stormvale Castle has a secret path that bypasses the main gate entirely. A gatekeeper NPC named Gostock will offer to show you this path, but if you take it, Gostock will follow your progress through the castle and loot Godric's rune before you can. The game is quietly teaching you that the easy path often comes with a cost you don't see until later. 12. The ramparts of Stormvale are covered in bodies impaled on stakes. This is a deliberate visual reference to historical accounts of rulers who used impalement as both execution and display. Godric, as a ruler who grafts body parts onto himself to project power, would be exactly the kind of person who treats death as spectacle. 13. The bird enemies perched on the walls of Stormvale drop a weapon called the Bloodhound's Fang when encountered in a nearby cave. The birds themselves seem to be scouts or watchers, placed high up with clear sightlines over the castle grounds. One possible reading is that these birds were trained or created to serve as surveillance, which would fit a paranoid ruler like Godric. 14. Godric the Grafted's full title in the lore is Godric the Golden, or more specifically, he is described as the most lowly of the demigods. He is the only one who needed to graft additional arms and heads onto himself to compete with his peers. His arena, the throne room of Stormvale, is covered in the remnants of those he grafted. The floor is made of people. 15. In Godric's boss fight, during his second phase cutscene, he grabs a dragon and grafts its foreleg onto his own arm. This is almost certainly a reference to the act of appropriation, taking power that doesn't belong to you and forcing it to serve you. It's also just genuinely disturbing to watch every time. 16. The Round Table Hold, the hub area players access after defeating Godric or simply progressing far enough, exists in a location that is technically outside the lands between. The architecture is different from anything else in the game. The sky outside the windows is always dark, and no map data covers it. It exists in a kind of interstitial space that the game never fully explains. 17. Enya, the finger reader at the Round Table Hold, is blind. She reads the will of the two fingers through touch rather than sight. This is a reference to historical oracles and soothsayers, who are often described as blind, with the implication that physical sight is a distraction from deeper perception. 18. The two fingers at the Round Table Hold appear to be organic, fleshy appendages emerging from a stone seat. If you look at them long enough, you can see them move slightly. It's subtle enough that many players miss it entirely. The movement suggests they are alive, not artifacts. 19. The War Counselor E.G., the giant who guards the road leading to Ranni's Rise, has a quest line that intersects with 3 other quest lines simultaneously. He is aware of the player's other alliances, in a way that most NPCs aren't. His dialogue changes depending on what you've done elsewhere in the world, which suggests he has his own information network that the player never directly observes. 20. The 3 fingers hidden beneath the subterranean shunning grounds in Lanedale are, visually, the opposite of the 2 fingers. Where the 2 fingers are pale, upright, and formal, the 3 fingers are sprawling, chaotic, and wrapped in fire. They represent the flame of frenzy, which is not simply madness, but one possible reading suggests it is freedom from the illusion of order. 21. The Weeping Peninsula, south of Limgrave, is separated from the mainland mass by a bridge. Bridges in Elden Ring tend to mark transitions between different types of territory. The Weeping Peninsula is notably more melancholy in its colour palette, with darker grasses and more ruins per square metre than Limgrave proper. The game seems to use geography to communicate mood. 22. The Castle Morn on the southern tip of the Weeping Peninsula contains a questline involving a woman named Irina and her father. The questline ends badly regardless of what you do. This is an example of what might be called From Software's passive tragedy model, where the world is already in the process of ending when you arrive, and your choices can only delay or redirect, never fully prevent, the worst outcomes. 23. The demi-human enemies found throughout the Weeping Peninsula and elsewhere in the lands between are described in item lore as beings that were once human but devolved, or perhaps more accurately were left behind by civilization. One item suggests they worship their own primitive gods. This gives them a dignity that the game's combat might otherwise obscure. 24. The isolated merchant found on the Weeping Peninsula sells an item called the Note Walking Mausoleum. This note, like all merchant notes in the game, is essentially a piece of in-world documentation. Someone wrote it down. Someone thought it was worth selling. The existence of a mercantile economy for information in a world this broken suggests that knowledge is still considered valuable, even when almost everything else has collapsed. 25. The walking mausoleums, those giant stone creatures that carry coffins on their backs and wander across Limgrave and other regions, have bells hanging from their undersides. Striking the bells, or more specifically the barnacles that grow on their legs, causes them to kneel. One possible reading is that these creatures are not hostile by nature, they are caretakers. The bells were placed there specifically to communicate with them. 26. Inside each walking mausoleum is a single coffin. The coffin contains a duplicate of a demigod's great rune, which the player can use to duplicate their own remembrances. The implication here is that the mausoleums were built to preserve memory, to carry the echo of important deaths through a world that keeps breaking down. 27. The bestial sanctum in the northeastern corner of Caelid can be accessed from Limgrave via Waygate very early in the game. If you arrive there before you're meant to, you will find a single black blade kindred guarding the entrance who will kill you almost instantly. This is one of the more famous examples of what the community calls sequence breaking, and the existence of that kindred suggests From Software anticipated players would try. 28. Caelid itself is a region defined by a single event, the battle between Malenia and Radahn, which ended when Malenia released her Scarlet Rot to stop Radahn's advance. The rot didn't just affect Radahn, it affected everything. Every enemy in Caelid, every plant, every body of water. One possible reading is that Malenia won the battle but destroyed the land in doing so, which is a kind of victory that looks indistinguishable from defeat at scale. 29. General Radahn's armor, the Star Scourge armor set, is described as being built large enough to accommodate his massive frame, but Radahn's horse, Leonard, is tiny compared to him. The lore explains that Radahn loved his horse from childhood, when he was still a normal size, and learned gravity magic specifically so that he could continue riding Leonard without crushing him. This is presented as a small personal fact about a man who is otherwise a terrifying boss, and it has made Radahn one of the most beloved characters in the game for many players. 30. Leonard the horse can be found after the Radahn boss fight, eating Radahn's body. This is not played as disturbing, it is simply what is happening. One interpretation is that Radahn's love for Leonard was so genuine that even after death, some part of Radahn wanted Leonard to survive, and Leonard is doing exactly that. 31. The Festival of Radahn, the in-game event that frames the boss fight, was organised by Jarberg's Dialos and other characters, ostensibly to give Radahn a worthy death. But an alternative reading is that Radahn's madness from the Scarlet Rot had deteriorated to the point where he was eating soldiers and needed to be stopped, and the festival framing was a way to give that mercy killing a sense of ceremony and honour. 32. Radahn held back the stars through his gravity magic. The lore suggests he did this specifically to prevent one star from falling, because that star was the guiding star of Ranni's destiny. When Radahn is killed and his magic breaks, that star falls, opening the path to Nokron, the Eternal City. This means that killing Radahn is a step in Ranni's plan, and the festival may have been partially engineered by her agents. 33. The rot flowers in Caelid, the giant bulbous plants that explode when approached, look almost decorative in their coloration. Pink and red against the rust-coloured ground. There's something about them that suggests the Scarlet Rot has an aesthetic of its own, that it doesn't just destroy, it also produces forms that have their own kind of beauty, which makes it more unsettling. 34. Celia, Town of Sorcery, is a ghost town in Caelid where the spirit inhabitants replay their final moments on an endless loop. You can watch them, they cannot see you. One reading is that these spirits are trapped in a moment of betrayal because the town was sealed by someone from within to prevent the spread of rot, and the people inside never forgave that decision. 35. The Celia questline involves Millicent, a young woman infected with scarlet rot who carries a prosthetic arm. She is almost certainly one of Melinia's daughters, or a close analogue. Her questline tracks her journey toward acceptance of her condition, and depending on your choices, it ends either in her peace or in violence. This is one of the most emotionally grounded questlines in the game. 36. Millicent's prosthetic arm was built by a craftsman named Gowry, who is also in Celia. Gowry is not what he appears to be. He is connected to Melinia's cult in ways his initial dialogue conceals. The prosthetic arm he gives Millicent is, in one reading, a form of control, a way to keep her tethered to Melinia's legacy, even as she tries to separate herself from it. 37. The Dragon Barrow region of Caelid is home to Greyol, a massive dragon so old she cannot move. She is surrounded by smaller dragons who protect her. The item lore attached to Greyol suggests she is one of the last of the elder dragons, creatures who predate much of the current lore. Killing the smaller dragons kills her through shared health. She does not fight back. She cannot. 38. Fort Faroth in Caelid is one of the few places in the game where the item known as the Golden Scarab can be found. The scarab, based on its item description, is a creature that feeds on runes. Real-world scarab beetles were associated with rebirth and the cyclical nature of existence in ancient Egyptian culture. From Software's use of the name and imagery likely carries some of that meaning, given that runes in Elden Ring are essentially the currency of life and death. 39. The Red Main Castle in Caelid changes dramatically depending on whether you've triggered the Radahn festival. Before the festival, it's fully populated with hostile soldiers. During the festival, those soldiers are temporarily allies gathered for the event. After the fight, it empties out. The same physical space holds three completely different social configurations, which is a quiet piece of world building that most players only notice on a second playthrough. 40. The Crucible Knights found throughout the game are some of the oldest beings in the lands between. Their armor contains echoes of the Crucible, the primordial state of life from which the Erd Tree eventually grew. Their Crucible incantations, which allow them to sprout tails and fins and other ancient biological features, suggest that life in the lands between was once far more fluid and undifferentiated than it became under the Golden Order. 41. The Erd Tree itself doesn't produce fruit in the traditional sense. The golden seeds found at its base are described as things that fell from the Erd Tree, small offshoots of its divine power. The fact that they can be used to increase the number of flask uses suggests that the Erd Tree, even in its dying state, is still producing something nourishing. It just doesn't know how to stop. 42. The Elden Ring, the actual object that was shattered, is never seen in its complete form during the game. You collect great runes, which are pieces of it, but the ring itself is glimpsed only in flashbacks and art. This is consistent with a design philosophy that keeps the most important things slightly out of reach, just visible enough to understand their significance, but never so close that they lose their mystique. 43. Marika, the Eternal, the God Queen who shattered the Elden Ring, is imprisoned inside the Erd Tree itself by the time the game begins. Her body is fused with the Erd Tree in a way that makes it unclear where she ends, and the tree begins. This physical merging is one possible reading of what it means to be truly bound to a divine order, absorbed into it so completely that individual identity becomes impossible to locate. 44. Godfrey, the first Elden Lord, was Marika's first consort, and the first of the Tarnished. He was exiled when his golden grace was stripped away, which in the lore is described as something Marika did deliberately. One interpretation is that Marika sent Godfrey away specifically so that he would grow stronger through hardship, creating someone powerful enough to return and eventually challenge the order she was already planning to dismantle. 45. Hoara Lux Godfrey's true self beneath the Elden Lord persona, is a wrestler and tribal warrior from a culture that predates the Golden Order. When he reveals this in his boss fight, it's framed as him shedding a role he played for an entire age of the world. The transition happens mid-fight, and the second phase of the Godfrey/Harara Luke's fight is arguably more grounded and physical than almost any other boss encounter in the game. 46. The Golden Lineage, the family tree of Godfrey and Marika's descendants, is a tangled mess of half-siblings, stepchildren, and adopted children. Godric, despite his claims of being part of this lineage, is so distantly related that the other demigods openly mock him. His obsessive grafting can be read as a physical attempt to compensate for the thinness of his actual bloodline. 47. Rennala, Queen of the Full Moon, was once the most powerful sorcerer in the lands between and the leader of the Academy of Raya Lucaria. After her husband Radagon left her for Marika, she retreated into the Academy's inner library, surrounded herself with her pupils, and began a ritual called rebirth, repeatedly creating failed versions of her children. The amber egg she cradles throughout her boss fight contains something she's been trying to hatch for years without success. 48. The pupils who guard Rennala in her boss fight are her own students, now reduced to crawling servitors who have given their bodies to maintain her magical cocoon. This is presented without editorializing. You kill them to progress. The game doesn't comment on it. One reading is that this is exactly what devotion to a broken system looks like. People sacrificing themselves to protect something that has already lost its original purpose. 49. Rennala's full moon sorceries are among the most visually striking spells in the game. The full moon she conjures during her second phase deals magic damage in a slow drifting arc. In real-world mythology, the full moon is associated with revelation, clarity, and the completion of cycles. Rennala, who is herself stuck in a kind of loop, using a moon that represents completion to fight in a state of incomplete grief, carries a contradiction that feels intentional. 50. The Academy of Raya Lucaria was built over a site of special magical significance, a giant stone disc or seal that predates the Academy itself. The Academy's founders essentially built their institution on top of something they didn't fully understand. This is a recurring theme in Elden Ring, where great institutions are constructed on foundations whose true nature was already being concealed or forgotten by the time the building began. 51. The Carian royal family. Rennala's original bloodline had a long-standing rivalry with the Golden Order. The Carian Manor, on the western cliffs of Liurnia, holds the remnants of this family, tended by their loyal soldiers even after the family itself has nearly ceased to exist. The loyalty of these soldiers to a house that is essentially over is one possible reading of what happens when identity becomes inseparable from service. 52. Royal Knight Loretta, who guards Carian Manor, was later sent to the Haligtree to guard Malenia. The fact that Loretta appears in two locations, as a boss in Carian Manor and later in the Haligtree DLC area of the game, raises questions about the timeline. 1. Reading suggests Loretta completed her duties at the manor before being dispatched to the Haligtree, but the exact sequence of events is deliberately left open. 53. The Three Sisters region west of Liurnia, home to Ranni's Rise, Renna's Rise, and Seluvis's Rise, is named for three towers that look identical. Only two of them are initially accessible. The third requires completing Ranni's questline part-way. This is a subtle piece of gating that communicates without a loading screen or menu that the world opens up in response to your actions. 54. Ranni's questline is generally considered the most elaborate in the game. It involves no fewer than 6 named characters across multiple regions, requires the player to travel to 3 underground areas, and culminates in a secret ending that requires the player to summon Ranni at the very end of the game after everything else is complete. From Software designed an entire ending that most players miss on their first playthrough, hidden inside the most elaborate questline in the game. 55. The Dark Moon Greatsword, which is Ranni's gift to the player at the end of her questline, is a spiritual successor to the Moonlight Greatsword, a weapon that has appeared in virtually every From Software game since the early King's Field titles. The presence of this weapon in Elden Ring is the most consistent Easter egg in the studio's entire history. The weapon changes in name, appearance, and lore, but it is always there. 56. Preceptor Seluvis, Ranni's advisor, runs a secret operation in which he turns people into puppets using a potion. If you give his potion to certain NPCs, they become his marionettes. He wants you to give it to Nefeli Lux. One reading of Seluvis is that he is not loyal to Ranni but to his own agenda, and that his position within her network is one of infiltration rather than genuine service. 57. Nefeli Lux, the warrior you meet early in Stormvale Castle, is Godfrey's adopted daughter. She doesn't know this for most of her questline. Her questline can end with her ascending to the throne of Stormvale, becoming its new ruler, which is one of the few unambiguously positive outcomes the game offers for a named NPC. 58. The Fingerslayer Blade, a weapon you retrieve during Ranni's questline, is specifically designed to harm beings made of the same substance as the two fingers. This implies that someone, at some point, created a weapon for the specific purpose of killing the agents of the Greater Will. That someone was Nokron. The Eternal City was building weapons against its own divine patron. 59. Nokron, the Eternal City, exists underground, directly beneath Mistwood in Limgrave. It was a mirror city, a reflection of Lanedale above, once favoured by the stars. When the stars fell, after Radahn's defeat, Nokron cracked open and became accessible. The falling of the stars, which is cosmically significant, is also literally the mechanism that opens a dungeon. From Software doesn't usually separate grand myth from mechanical door opening. 60. The Mimic tier boss in Nokron copies the player character's exact appearance, equipment, and moveset. This is technically impressive, but it's also thematically interesting. You are fighting yourself. The lore describes mimic tears as fragments of a silver liquid that takes on the shape of living things and tries to become them. One reading is that the mimic tear is not hostile, but confused, genuinely trying to understand what it means to be alive, by copying the most alive thing it can find. 61. If you enter the mimic tear arena with no equipment, the mimic will copy your naked, unequipped self. This is a famous community discovery. It means the mimic tear, the terrifying copy of you, is now a naked person who will try to hit you with their fists. This is either hilarious or genuinely sad, depending on your mood. 62. The Knight's Sacred Ground in Nokron contains the Fingerslayer Blade, but it also contains a boss called the Ancestor Spirit, one of two giant spectral deer bosses found in the game. These deer are described as sacred to a civilization that predated the Golden Order. Their presence underground suggests that the old faiths went into hiding rather than disappearing, preserved in the literal depths of the world. 63. The second ancestor spirit is found in Siofra River, another underground region accessible from Limgrave through a well. Siofra predates Nokron and is architecturally distinct. It has its own sky, created by bioluminescent phenomena, and its own population of spirits. The existence of these underground civilizations raises the question of how many layers of history the lands between is sitting on top of. The Tibia Mariner enemies found in various regions of the game row boats through the air, or more specifically, through the space where the land is. They carry horns that summon skeletons. The lore suggests they are ferrymen of the dead, guiding souls to the underworld. Their boats moving through solid ground implies that from their perspective, the land is not solid at all, but something more like water that the living simply can't perceive correctly. 65. The walking mausoleums revisited briefly have different bell sounds depending on the region they're found in. In Limgrave they ring lower, in the mountain tops of the giants they are nearly silent, muffled by snow. Whether this is intentional audio design or a side effect of environmental acoustic modelling isn't clear, but players in the community have pointed it out repeatedly. 66. The Altus Plateau, reached either through the Grand Lift of Dectus or through a series of caves, feels immediately different from the areas below. The light is warmer, the architecture is grander, The enemies are harder. The transition is not explained with text or narration. The game simply changes tone when you arrive, and most players feel it before they can articulate what changed. 67. The Grand Lift of Dectus requires 2 medallion halves to activate. The 2 halves are hidden in 2 separate forts on opposite ends of the map. This is a classic From Software design move, splitting a key across 2 locations to ensure the player has explored broadly before accessing a new area. But it's also thematically consistent, because the Dectus medallion was a symbol of the Erd Tree's authority, and authority in Elden Ring is always fractured. 68. Fort Hate in Eastern Limgrave contains 1/2 of the Dectus medallion. Fort Faroth in Caelid contains the other. The 2 forts are essentially mirrors of each other architecturally, but one sits in a relatively peaceful landscape and the other is surrounded by rot. This contrast suggests they were built at the same time under the same authority, which then diverged dramatically in the time since. 69. The shaded castle in the Altus Plateau is one of the most visually unpleasant areas in the game, covered in a poisoned swamp that glows yellow-green at night. Inside is a boss called Elimir of the Briar, who wields a sword that attacks at a distance, apparently guided by his will rather than his hand. The sword flies through the air during the fight, in a way that feels genuinely supernatural, even in a game full of supernatural things. 70. Elimir's item lore describes him as a prisoner who was stripped of his bell-bearing but never of his weapon. The implication is that he was important enough to imprison, but dangerous enough that nobody could actually take his sword away from him. One reading is that his imprisonment was voluntary, a place of refuge rather than punishment, and he stayed because he chose to. 71. The Leyndell royal capital is built around the leg of a fossilized dragon. The dragon's body is enormous, stretching across entire districts of the city, and it's unclear at first whether it's a sculpture or a ruin. It's a ruin. This was a real dragon, killed at some point in history, so large that the city was built around its corpse because moving it would have been impossible. 72. Leyndell was also the site where Radagon fought the Elden Beast, the divine creature inside the Elden Ring, and lost. This history is visible in the architecture if you know what to look for. The scorch marks, the cracked stone in specific patterns, the golden residue in some of the older hallways. The city carries the evidence of this ancient battle in its bones. 73. The Elden Beast, the final boss of the game's main quest, lives inside Radagon, who is himself fused with Marika. This means that when you fight Radagon, you're fighting a man who is simultaneously a woman, both of whom are the physical container for a divine entity. The 3-part nature of this boss sequence, Radagon, then the Elden Beast, is the culmination of the entire game's central mystery about identity and divinity. 74. Queen Marika's hammer is in the game as a weapon the player can use. Its description states that she used it to destroy the Elden Ring. The hammer itself looks modest compared to the magnitude of what it was used for. There's something in that contrast, the smallness of the object versus the enormity of the act, that feels deliberate. 75. The Erd Tree's interior, accessed during the endgame, contains the Elden Throne where Marika is imprisoned. The throne room is enormous, but Marika herself, fused with the throne, looks small inside it. This visual choice inverts expectations. The most powerful being in the world's history is portrayed as trapped and reduced, not regal. The Stormvale Legacy dungeon has a sewer system beneath it that most players never explore. Inside the sewers are items and details that suggest the castle had a life of its own before Godric's occupation. There's evidence of a previous occupant, a previous administration, a version of Stormvale that predates the Grafting King entirely. 77. The Round Table Hold has a door that is locked for most of the game. Behind it is a room with the corpse of a Two Fingers. Reaching this area requires betraying the Two Fingers' guidance, specifically going against their wishes by pursuing certain quest lines. The game unlocks the door as a consequence of your choices, revealing that the institution you've been working within is itself decaying at its core. D, Hunter of the Dead, is one of the first NPCs you meet who is actively hostile toward a specific group. He hates the undead. the lore gives him reasons for this, but his hostility exists before the player understands those reasons, which means for a large portion of the game, he reads as simply prejudiced. Whether this is a critique of that kind of categorical hatred is open to interpretation. 79. Dee's twin brother, also named Dee, can be encountered in the Siofra aqueduct. He doesn't speak. He simply exists in a place his brother doesn't know about, living an alternative life beneath the surface. The silent twin, as a foil to the vocal, opinionated brother above, is a simple storytelling contrast, but it lands. 80. Fia, the deathbed companion at the Round Table Hold, will embrace the player character if you choose to let her. She gives you a small debuff in exchange. Her questline involves the concept of deathbed dreams, a practice of sleeping with the dead to preserve their essence. One interpretation is that Fia is not a villain but a preservationist, someone trying to hold on to what the Golden Order wants erased. 81. Fia's ending, the Age of the Duskborn, involves releasing death into the world in a form that is accessible to all beings regardless of grace. The Golden Order's system of grace was exclusionary. Fia's version of death is universal. Whether this is presented as better or worse than the alternatives is left entirely to the player. 82. Dung Eater, one of the most unsettling characters in the game, is an Elden Ring character whose motivations are presented with minimum context for maximum horror. He wants to curse all future life. His ending, the Blessing of Despair, is the game's darkest conclusion. What makes him interesting as a character is that he seems genuinely happy. He is not angry or tragic. He simply wants what he wants with complete clarity. 83. The Dung Eater's armor, the Omens set, connects him to a broader group of beings in the game called Omens, people born with vestigial horns who are considered cursed and are traditionally killed at birth. The Dung Eater's obsession with defilement may be rooted in a childhood of being treated as a defiled thing, and his revenge is to make everyone share that condition. One reading only, of course. 84. Mong, Lord of Blood, is one of the Omens who survived his designated execution. He did so by forming a pact with a different divine entity, the Formless Mother, a being of blood who exists outside the Erdtree's hierarchy. Mog's entire aesthetic, the blood, the gilded palace, the elaborate cult, is a parody of the Golden Order's own aesthetic, extravagant authority built on a foundation of violence. 85. Mog kidnapped Miquella, Melinia's twin, and brought him to the Mogwyn Palace, a crimson underground space beneath the consecrated snowfield. Miquella is a child in appearance, though ancient in actual age, because Melinia's scarlet rot was a curse they shared in the womb, and Miquella was unable to complete his growth. Mog's obsession with Miquella is framed as devotion, which makes it more disturbing, not less. 86. Miquella's cocoon, from which he never fully emerges during the base game, is the source of the needle-like item called the Unaloid Gold Needle. Miquella created this needle to sever the influence of outer gods, specifically to cure Melinia of the Scarlet Rot. The fact that he built a cure for his sister before anything else says something about their relationship. 87. The Halig Tree, Miquella's personal project, was meant to be a sanctuary for all those rejected by the Golden Order, the Omens, the Cursed, the Rot-afflicted. He planted it himself, nurtured it with his own blood, and abandoned it when Mog took him. The Halig Tree still grows. It's still accepting refugees. Miquella's intent survives him, even in his absence. 88. Melinia's boss fight is almost universally regarded as the hardest in the game. She heals when her attacks connect, even if you block them. She has two phases. Her second phase involves a transformation that sends blossoms of scarlet rot raining down on the arena. She is also described in her lore as never having lost a battle. Fighting her is, in a sense, the game asking you to become the first person to beat her. 89. Melinia's scarlet rot is a curse from the outer god called the Rot Goddess, who appears throughout the game's iconography in stylized insect and flower imagery. The rot is not simply decay, it is a kind of rebirth. The flowers that bloom from rot are genuinely beautiful, and the lore suggests this is intentional from the Rot goddess's perspective. She sees what she creates as glorious. 90. The Clean Rot Knights, Malenia's personal guard, are fully afflicted with scarlet rot, but have not succumbed to madness. They chose to follow Malenia, even knowing what her presence would do to them. Their equipment is corroded, but functional. They are the most loyal characters in the game, defined entirely by a choice they made knowing the cost. 91. The Halig Tree's canopy level is one of the most precarious traversal sections in the game. You walk along massive branches and roots at heights that would be instantly fatal if you fell. The enemies here are specifically designed to knock you off the edge. This is, on a surface level, a level design choice. But it also communicates that reaching Malenia requires a kind of suicidal commitment to the path forward. 92. Commander Nile, the boss guarding the approach to Malenia's sanctum, is a veteran commander who sacrificed his legs for the Halig Tree. He fights from a mechanical prosthetic lower body, surrounded by the spirits of soldiers who died serving him. His dialogue before the fight suggests he has no illusions about winning. He is buying time and nothing more. 93. The mountaintops of the Giants is the coldest region in the game, covered in permanent snow and populated by colossal frost giants who are already dead, frozen in poses of defeat or exhaustion. The region has almost no living enemies. It is a memorial to a war that ended so completely that nothing remained to bury the dead except snow. 94. The fire giants, the last of whom serves as a boss in this region, were the keepers of the Flame of Ruin, which is the weapon that was used to destroy the Erd Tree once before in the game's ancient history. The last fire giant is blind in one eye, a wound inflicted by Marika's champion long ago. He has been chained to the mountain for so long that the chains have become part of his body. 95. Killing the fire giant triggers the burning of the Erd Tree, which is the game's major narrative turning point. Malenia, your guide and torchbearer, immolates herself to light the flame. Or she does if you haven't pursued the Lord of Frenzied Flame path, in which case you do it yourself, and she survives only to swear vengeance. Either way, the tree burns. The tree always burns. 96. The Frenzied Flame, stored beneath Lanedell in the subterranean shunning grounds, is described as something that predates the current Divine Order. It is older than the Erd Tree, older than the Two Fingers, older possibly than the concept of the Elden Ring itself. One reading is that it is not evil, but simply prior, a force that existed before the world was organized into order and chaos, and its madness-inducing properties are a side effect of encountering something that vast. 97. The Shabriri Grape, an item associated with the Three Fingers and the Flame of Frenzy, describes Shabriri as a man who drew all of humanity's curse into his own eyes. He went blind so that others wouldn't have to carry that burden. This is an act of self-sacrifice within a faction the game otherwise presents as monstrous, which suggests the relationship between the frenzy and madness is more complicated than the initial framing implies. 98. Hieta, the NPC questline associated with the Three Fingers, begins with her asking you for Shabriri grapes because she thinks they're actual grapes. She is slowly going blind throughout her questline. By the end, she has become a finger maiden for the Three Fingers, embracing the flame of frenzy. Her arc is framed not as corruption, but as finding her purpose, which is deliberately uncomfortable to process. 99. The Lands Between has no ocean. It appears to be a floating landmass, surrounded by a vast golden fog at its edges. If you reach the physical boundary of the map, you find that the world simply ends. There's nothing beyond. This is both a technical reality of open-world design, and in the lore, a possible indication that the Lands Between is not a natural place, but a constructed one, maintained by divine will. 100. The first step, the starting location of the game, is a cliff overlooking the golden fog. You begin the game at the literal edge of the world. Your first direction of travel is inward, toward the center of a dying civilization. The geography is a map of the journey. 101. The Spirit Spring Jump, the geysers that launch you and your horse upward, are found throughout the game, and are almost always positioned near items or areas that reward the verticality they create. This is not unique to Elden Ring as a design choice, but the visual effect of riding torrent upward through glowing steam is one of the game's most memorable physical sensations. 102. Torrent, the spectral steed, was given to you by Melina. His origins are described only obliquely. He was not always yours. He belonged to someone before you. Someone connected to the Erd Tree, possibly even to Marika herself. His appearance, a horse made of blue-white spirit fire, marks him as something between a living creature and an echo of one. 103. If you look at Torrent closely during certain cutscenes, his hooves don't quite touch the ground. He's always slightly elevated, which is consistent with his nature as a spectral entity. This is subtle enough that many players never notice it and assume it's a rendering quirk. 104. The Spirit Ashes mechanic, which allows you to summon the spirits of defeated enemies as allies, is explained in lore through the spirit calling bell that Roderika gives you. Roderika herself becomes a spirit tuner, someone who can sense the feelings of spirit ashes and help them become stronger. Her characterization as someone unusually empathic toward the dead connects the mechanic to the game's broader themes about what the dead still want. 105. Roderika's introductory location, the Stormhill Shack, is covered in the melted remains of people she traveled with. Her companions attempted to reach Stormvale and were killed, absorbed, or driven away. She is the only survivor. She considers this her fault. Her eventual role as a craftsperson who tends to the dead could be read as a response to this guilt. 106. The jellyfish spirit ash, one of the first ashes you can acquire, is described as a spirit belonging to a jellyfish that drifted down from the sky. There are jellyfish in the sky above certain regions of the lands between, drifting quietly in the upper atmosphere. Nobody in the game explains why. They are simply there, enormous and luminous, untouched by any of the catastrophes below. 107. The lands between sky changes depending on the region and the time of day, but it also changes depending on proximity to certain events or discoveries. The sky, near the Erd Tree, has a particular golden haze. The sky in Farum Azula, the crumbling time-locked citadel, looks like it belongs to a different era entirely, reddish-brown and storm-torn. 108. Farum Azula is one of the most visually disorienting areas in the game. Its architecture floats in disconnected sections above an eternal storm. There are no NPCs who explain its history. Item lore and environmental detail together suggest it was a city built by a civilization that predated the Erd Tree, and that its disintegration is ongoing, happening in real time, across a span of geological ages. 109. Malekith, the Black Blade, guards Farum Azula as its last keeper. He is also Marika's own shadow, her loyal beast warrior. The black blade he carries is imbued with destined death, the power to make things truly and permanently dead rather than undead. Marika had Malekith lock this power away inside the Rune of Death. She removed death from the world. The question the game suggests, but never fully answers, is whether she did this out of mercy or control. 110. The Rune of Death, stored inside Malekith, was stolen by Ranni, who used it to kill her own body and her two fingers, severing herself from the Golden Order's control. This act of self-murder was also an act of self-liberation. Ranni's questline is ultimately about her desire to exist outside of any divine hierarchy, in the cold dark of the universe, free from influence in either direction. 111. Banal, a formerly loyal Volcano Manor assassin, invades you in Farum Azula as a late-game event. By this point in the game, many quest lines have collapsed or concluded. His invasion feels like a loose thread being tied off. His dialogue suggests he's given up on grand schemes and is simply trying to find something worth fighting. 112. The Godskin Apostles and Godskin Nobles, the enemies of the Godskin faction, were once tasked with flaying gods. This is presented in the game as a historical role, something they were created for. By the time of the game, gods are rare or dead, and the Godskins continue their mission against weaker targets. There's a sense of an institution that has outlasted its purpose and doesn't know how to stop. 113. The Godskin duo boss fight in Farum Azula features both a noble and an apostle fighting simultaneously. They share a health pool, in the sense that you must deplete their collective health bar across multiple deaths, because they revive each other. This makes the fight mechanically distinct from nearly every other boss in the game, and is frequently cited as one of the most frustrating. 114. The Dragon Communion Altar on the Church of Dragon Communion allows you to consume dragon hearts in exchange for incantations that grant draconic abilities. The item description of dragon hearts describes them as still warm after death. This sensory detail, warmth as a sign of lingering life, is one of many small pieces of writing in the game that land harder than they need to. 115. Placidusax, the dragon who was once Elden Lord before the current Divine Order was established, is found in a time-locked space in Farum Azula, curled around a presence that is no longer there. His god abandoned him. He waits for a god who will never return. His boss arena is a storm of gold and lightning, and the fight is difficult, but his movements are deliberate, almost ceremonial, as if he is performing a ritual of battle rather than fighting out of anger. 116. Two-headed Placidusax has one head that is clearly present and one that flickers in and out of existence, partially visible across a temporal threshold. This suggests his other head exists in a different time, or has already been destroyed in some future the player can't access. It's one of the stranger visual details in a game full of strange visual details. 117. The Elden Beast in its item description is described as the Elden Ring itself given form. It is not simply an entity that contains the Elden Ring. It is the Elden Ring. When you destroy it, you're not defeating a guardian. You're unmaking the Divine Order directly. Every ending involves you doing something with the power that results, and none of them fully restore what the Elden Ring was before Marika broke it. 118. The 6 endings of Elden Ring all involve a different philosophy about what power is for. The Age of Fracture, the default ending, simply restores the status quo with you on top. The Age of Order corrects the law of the ring. The Age of Duskborn opens death to all. The Blessing of Despair curses all life. The Lord of Frenzied Flame burns everything. And the Age of Stars sends the ring away from the world entirely. From Software rarely gives players this many explicit philosophical choices at the end, and they're all framed as equally plausible. 119. The Ranni ending, the Age of Stars, is the only ending that another named character participates in directly. Every other ending is the player character alone. The Ranni ending has her return, thank you, and lead the world into an uncharted era. It's the only ending with warmth in it. Whether that makes it the correct ending is a question the game doesn't answer. 120. The Church of Eleh, the first gracelit location most players find, outside the tutorial, sits near a ruined structure. The ruined portion suggests this was a site of significance before the shattering. Now it's the first safe space you find. There's a gentle irony in the fact that your first moments of safety in this broken world occur inside the ruins of something that was already broken. 121. Merchant Kale, the first merchant you encounter, gives you the spirit calling bell if you speak to him after acquiring your first spirit ashes. He doesn't need to do this. He's a merchant. The gesture is gratuitous in the best sense, a stranger doing something kind for no commercial reason. He also plays a tune on a small instrument if you wait near him long enough, which is easy to miss. 122. The merchants throughout Elden Ring were once a people called the nomadic merchants, who travelled together in a large group called the caravan. At some point, the caravan was broken apart and the merchants were cursed so that they could not travel together. Their isolation is a punishment. Every merchant you meet is serving a sentence of enforced loneliness. 123. The item descriptions related to the merchant's curse suggest it was imposed by the Golden Order, possibly because the merchants possessed knowledge or traditions that the Order found threatening. What specific knowledge the merchants carried is never explicitly stated, but the fact that they were punished for it suggests it was considered dangerous rather than simply inconvenient. 124. Selen, the primeval sorcerer, is one of the most lore-rich NPCs in the game. She was expelled from the Academy of Raya Lucaria for pursuing a form of sorcery that the Academy considered heretical, specifically primeval current sorcery, which attempts to reach back to the very first principles of magic before they were systematized. She spent her exile scattered across the world in multiple bodies before the player helps her reassemble herself. 125. Selen's questline ends with one of two outcomes. In one, she successfully takes control of the Academy and continues her research. In the other, the Academy's own students overthrow her and trap her consciousness in a ball of flesh. The ball of flesh can still be summoned as a spirit ash. She is alive inside it, and her summon sign is still active. 1. Reading is that she would have chosen continued existence over nothing even in this form. Another is that this is a fate worse than death that the game presents without comment. 126. Azure and Lusat, the two master sorcerers whose equipment unlocks the most powerful sorceries in the game, are both found in states of petrified meditation. Azure is on a cliffside in the Altus Plateau. Lusat is in a cave in Caelid, behind a barrier of magic that requires a specific item to breach. Both of them have pushed their understanding of sorcery so far that they can no longer interact with the physical world in a normal way. Their knowledge has made them monuments. 127. The Comet Azure Sorcery, the most powerful single-hit spell in the game, fires a sustained beam of blue light that can stagger and destroy almost any enemy if used correctly. Its power comes from the primeval current, the original source of all magic before it was categorized and limited. Using Comet Azure feels like reaching past every restriction the world has placed on what magic should be allowed to do. 128. Gideon Ofnir, the All-Knowing, is the Lord of the Round Table Hold. He collects information. His quest line involves him gradually learning what you know through conversation, and the game eventually reveals that he's been passing your progress to others and manipulating events in ways that serve his own agenda. When he turns on you in the endgame, it's framed as the logical outcome of trusting someone who valued information over loyalty. 129. Gideon's boss fight, in which he uses a combination of sorceries and incantations drawn from all the demigods you've defeated, is one of the game's most interesting mechanical expressions of its lore. He's not inherently powerful. He's learned, he's borrowed, he fights using other people's power, which is exactly how he's functioned throughout the entire game. 130. The Tarnished's Great Rune, which the player never receives because there is no Tarnished Great Rune in the game, is a deliberate absence. Every other major figure in the world has one. The player character is an exception. One reading is that the Tarnished is defined specifically by their lack of a fixed destiny, which is why they alone can choose any ending. 131. The golden grace trails that guide you across the world, those cascading lines of light you follow towards sites of grace, come from Marika. They are her guidance. When you follow them, you are following her will, or the echo of her will, since she's imprisoned and unable to direct you actively. The fact that you can choose to stop following them at any point is a freedom the game offers without announcing. 132. The sites of grace themselves, which function as checkpoints and fast travel nodes, are also described as places where the grace of the Erd Tree is concentrated. Resting at them restores your flasks and respawns enemies. One reading is that the Erd Tree's grace is so abundant that simply sitting in its presence heals you. Another is that dying repeatedly in a world, being restored to a fixed point over and over, is the Tarnished's own form of the Erd Tree's endless regeneration imposed on a mortal body. 133. The grasses that grow near sites of grace in certain regions are golden, coloured by the Erd Tree's influence. In regions further from the Erd Tree's power, like Caelid, the grace is still there, but the environment around it is visibly sick. The grass is rust-coloured or absent. The light is different. The game consistently uses colour to communicate the health of the divine order in any given region. 134. The death-touched catacombs in Limgrave one of the first dungeons accessible to new players, contains skeletons that rise again after being killed unless you destroy them in a specific way. This is the game's introduction to the concept that not all death is permanent in the lands between. The mechanic introduces the lore before the lore is explained, which is a consistent design philosophy throughout the game. 135. The Erdtree burial watchdogs, the floating stone lions that appear as bosses in many of the catacombs, are described as constructs built to guard the dead. They have no life of their own. They are furniture with a function. The game gives you no information about who built them or how, which makes them feel like the last surviving objects of an administrative system that has completely dissolved. 1736. The minor Erdtrees. Scattered throughout the regions are smaller versions of the central Erdtree, offshoots growing from the same root system. Each one is guarded by a tree sentinel or similar enemy. When the Erdtree burns in the endgame, these minor trees also appear to die. The central tree's health and the health of every branch it has ever grown are inseparable. 137. The Elden Star's incantation, one of the hardest items to acquire in the game, summons a cascade of golden stars. Its description says it's an ancient Elden Ring spell from before the Golden Order, a prayer to the greater will in a form that predates formalized religion. Using it feels less like casting a spell and more like making a request that dates back to the beginning of everything. 138. The Golden Order Fundamentalists, the faction that enforces the Erdtree's religious authority, have their own incantations rooted in pure logical interpretations of the Golden Order's principles. Their magic is rule-based, codified, written down. It contrasts directly with the ancient, wordless quality of things like Elden Stars. The difference between the old faith and the institutionalized version of it is visible in the way the magic behaves. 139. Brother Corhin, the Golden Order cleric you meet at the Round Table Hold, goes on a journey to find a man named Goldmask, a silent philosopher who is seeking a perfect interpretation of the Golden Order. Goldmask cannot speak. He communicates only through gesture. Corhin translates for him. The two of them together are working toward a theological correction that, if implemented, would rewrite the rules of the divine order from within. 140. Goldmask's ending, the Age of Order, is the only ending that requires you to solve a riddle. Goldmask gives you a question, mid-quest line, that requires you to understand specific lore and then perform an action in a distant location to answer it. It's the only ending the game treats as an intellectual exercise rather than a moral choice. 141. The Crucible Aspect incantations, which grant the user ancient biological features, like a tail or wings, are forbidden by the Golden Order because they represent a form of life that predates and therefore undermines the Order's claim to be the natural state of things. Using them doesn't make you a monster. It makes you, in the game's logic, more primordially alive than the Order is comfortable with. 142. The Erdtree avatar bosses, which guard the minor Erdtrees, carry a staff topped with a golden flower. In their second phase, they plant this staff in the ground and release a burst of golden light. The staff sinking into the earth is evocative of planting. The Erdtree avatars aren't just guardians, they are, in one reading, gardeners. 143. The deep-root depths, accessible from the subterranean shunning grounds beneath Lanedale, is where the roots of the Erdtree extend deepest into the world. It's also where Fia's questline culminates. She goes there to deliver the curse mark of death and begin the process of creating the death root, which will enable her Age of the Duskborn ending. The very bottom of the world's divine tree is where the alternative to the Golden Order takes root. 144. The Prince of Death, encountered in the deep-root depths as a boss, is not a fully developed character in the way many other bosses are. He is an idea that has taken on a body. He is what Deathroot produces when left to grow unchecked. The implication is that death, freed from the containment the Golden Order placed on it, becomes something that wants things and pursues them. 145. The Crucible Knight Ordovis, the most powerful of the Crucible Knights encountered in the game, fights alongside a companion in his boss arena. The two of them coordinate attacks. Their cooperation in a place as solitary and enclosed as a small dungeon boss room creates a feeling of being genuinely outmatched in a social sense. 2 versus 1, in a game where you've been alone the entire time. 146. The Stormhawk Dean, a spirit ash of a hawk, can be found in the Stormvale Castle region. Spirit ashes of birds and hawks in the game are often described as belonging to warriors who chose to be reborn as predatory creatures, suggesting that some spirits in the lands between exercise genuine agency over what form they take after death. 147. The Warhawk enemies in Stormvale Castle, living birds trained to attack, carry swords bound to their talons. The image of a bird using a human weapon has something unnerving about it, not because it's implausible in a fantasy context, but because it implies someone trained them to fight this way and that the bird complied. 148. The marionette soldiers, encountered in Liurnia and certain other regions, are puppet warriors built by Seluvis. Their movements are stiff and mechanical, in a way that ordinary enemies aren't. From Software's animation team apparently studied puppet theatre, specifically bunraku puppetry from Japan, when designing their movement patterns. The eerie quality of watching them fight comes from movement that is almost human, but not quite. 149. Pidia, the craftsman who works for Rani and lives at the top of Carrion Manor, deals in marionette soldiers and provides a path to some of Seluvis's material. He can be killed by a summon of the whirligig marionettes if you betray him. The fact that the instrument of his death is the same category of creature he trades in is one of many examples in this game where irony is deployed through environmental storytelling rather than dialogue. 150. The jar people, those clay jar-headed NPCs found in certain regions, are one of the stranger aesthetic choices in Elden Ring. They carry actual ceramic jars for heads and seem to regard themselves as warriors. Iron Fist Alexander, the most notable jar person in the game, treats his injuries by filling himself with the flesh and spirit of warriors he has defeated. He considers this honorable. His questline is essentially a meditation on what it means to absorb the people who came before you. 151. Alexander's final location in the game, Farum Azula, is where his questline ends, in either a battle between you and him, or a peaceful goodbye. If you fight him, you receive an item called Alexander's Innards, which is literally the contents of his body, the compressed spirits and flesh of every warrior he ever absorbed. You can use this to upgrade your own power. The chain of absorption continues. 152. The warrior jar shard, Alexander's remembrance item, describes the shard as containing the essence of all who Alexander ever consumed. It gives you a damage bonus for using skills. You are, by using this item, fighting with the strength of everyone Alexander ate. The lineage of power in Elden Ring is almost always physical and direct. 153. Dialos, the nobleman who spends much of the game searching for his missing companion Lanya, ends up at Jarburg, a small town populated entirely by jar people, including their leader, Potboy. Dialos fails at almost everything he attempts throughout his questline. In Jarburg, he finds a place where his failures don't disqualify him. He becomes a protector of a small community. It's a modest end for a character the game introduced with considerable theatrical energy, but it fits. 154. Potboy, the leader of Jarburg, is childlike in demeanor and lives in a town that seems untouched by most of the world's violence. He tends his flowers. He worries about his people. He asks you not to hurt them. Jarburg is one of the few places in the game that functions as a community rather than a ruin, and it's governed by the most innocent character in the entire cast. 155. The Volcano Manor in Mount Gelmir is the base of a group of assassins dedicated to killing the champions of the Two Fingers. Lady Tanith leads the operation. The manor itself is beautiful, kept in pristine condition relative to most structures in the game. One interpretation of Tanith's character is that she maintains the manor as a statement that the opposition to the Golden Order can afford to be elegant. 156. Rykard, Lord of Blasphemy, is the demigod who rules the volcano beneath the manor. He has merged with the god-devouring serpent, an ancient entity that existed in the volcano before him. His stated intention is to devour all the gods. His body, by the time you fight him, is enormous, barely visible beyond the serpent's form. Rykard made himself into something so large and consuming that he can no longer be said to be a person in any conventional sense. 157. The Serpent Hunter, the weapon that deals massive damage to Rykard specifically, is found in his boss arena. The game places the one tool capable of defeating him directly in the room where you fight him. This is practical from a game design standpoint, but it also suggests someone anticipated this confrontation and prepared for it, leaving a weapon for whoever was going to come and do what needed doing. 158. Patches the Unscrupulous appears in Elden Ring, as he does in nearly every From Software game, as a merchant who initially tricks you, then settles into an uneasy mercantile relationship. He has appeared in Demon Souls, Dark Souls 1 through 3, Bloodborne, and now Elden Ring with variations on the same personality. His presence in every game is the longest-running Easter egg in the studio's modern history. 159. Patch's dialogue in Elden Ring references his own history of kicking people into holes, which is one of his signature moves across multiple games. He is aware of his reputation and leans into it, while simultaneously insisting he's trying to change. Whether he ever actually changes depends entirely on whether you choose to trust him, and the game doesn't tell you whether that trust is wise. 160. Sorcerer Rogier, found in Stormvale Castle and later at the Round Table Hold, is dying throughout his questline from a condition related to the Black Knives incident. He was investigating the assassination of a demigod and got too close to the event. His questline ends quietly. He simply passes away between your visits. No boss fight, no dramatic death, he just stops being present, one day. 161. The Black Knife Assassins, whose weapons were imbued with a fragment of destined death, were the perpetrators of the Night of the Black Knives, the assassination of Godwyn the Golden, Marika's first son. The assassins were Numan women, the same ethnic group as Marika. One reading of this is that the assassination was an inside job connected to the conspiracy Ranni was orchestrating. 162. Godwyn the Golden was the first to die in the Shattering's prelude, but because only his soul died and not his body continued to grow beneath the lands between, spreading into something called the Death Prince. His physical remains, root-like and vast, can be seen in the deep root depths. He is simultaneously one of the most beloved figures in the game's history and one of its most disturbing environmental details. 163. Blade the Half-Wolf is Ranni's shadow. In the same way, Maliketh is Marika's. He is loyal to her above everything, including his own instincts. His design, a giant, wolf-headed man in black armor, is arresting, but his characterization as someone who has chosen a person over an institutional role is what makes him genuinely affecting. He stays loyal to Ranni, even when the Two Fingers influence, built into his very nature, pushes him toward betrayal. 164. Blade's fate at the end of Ranni's questline is to go mad. The Two Fingers built a failsafe into his nature, a command to turn against anyone who threatened the Greater Will's plans, including Ranni. He fights against this. He loses. You find him at Ranni's Rise after completing the questline, howling, no longer recognizing you. He has to be killed. Ranni knows this will happen when she begins her plan. She proceeds anyway. 165. The design of Blade's armor was based, according to references from the community's analysis of promotional materials, on elements of medieval European plate armor combined with wolf fur detailing. The result is something that reads as both ancient and functional, a warrior who looks like he belongs to a tradition rather than a fabrication. 166. The Volcano Manor Letters. The assassination contracts you receive as a member of Tanith's organization target specific characters in the world. Some of these characters have quest lines you may be running simultaneously. Accepting and completing the assassination contracts can permanently cut off quest lines if you kill the targets before their stories conclude. The game doesn't warn you. You are responsible for knowing. 167. Juno Hoslow, Knight of Blood, is one of the invasion targets in the Volcano Manor questline. He invades you in return, after you kill his brother, Dialos's companion's killer, as part of a chain of retribution. The invasion feels personal, in a way most PvP invasions don't, because it's rooted in an NPC storyline you've been following. Someone in this world has decided they want you specifically dead, not as a game mechanic, but as a character choice. 168. The smithing master Hugh at the Round Table Hold is unable to leave. He is imprisoned there by an enchantment placed on him by Marika. His role is to forge the perfect weapon for a tarnished who has not yet arrived. He has been waiting for an indeterminate length of time. When you first speak to him, he doesn't know if you're the one he's been waiting for. He keeps working regardless. 169. Hugh's fear, expressed late in his questline, is that he will not finish the work before he dies. He is old. He knows he's old. He hopes that his craft outlasts him, that whatever weapon he's building will be ready when it's needed. His relationship to mortality and purpose is one of the more understated character studies in the game. 170. The Round Table Hold changes over the course of the game as NPCs arrive, leave, or die. It begins sparsely populated and becomes more crowded as you progress, then empties out again toward the end game. The social ecosystem of the Hold tells the story of a world in contraction. People gather, then scatter, then are gone. 171. The tarnished armor set, which the player begins the game wearing depending on their starting class, is described as the gear of someone who has come back from a long journey and not yet replaced their equipment. The implication is that the tarnished has been traveling for a long time before the events of the game, which the tutorial's coffin imagery reinforces. You didn't just die and come back. You came back from somewhere. 172. The Vagabond starting class, one of the most popular among new players for its balanced stats and heavy armor, begins the game with a weapon called a longsword. Longswords, in real historical terms, are associated with skilled fighting rather than brute force, which is slightly at odds with the Vagabond's backstory as a wandering mercenary. But the game treats them as a reliable middle ground that most combat scenarios can be navigated with. 173. The Astrologer starting class begins with a staff and a short sword. Its lore describes the astrologer as someone who read the stars, which in Elden Ring's world is directly connected to understanding the movements of divine entities. Astrologers in this world would have been able to predict events of cosmological significance. Whether the player character did this before the game begins is one of several things about the Tarnished's backstory that is deliberately left open. 174. The Prophet starting class has a backstory involving visions of chaos and begins with a torch. Torches in Elden Ring are a practical item but also consistently associated with characters who have a mission. Melina carries a torch. The flame of frenzy is evoked through fire. The Prophet beginning the game with literal fire is a detail that rewards attention on repeat playthroughs. 175. The Wretch starting class begins with nothing, no armor, no significant equipment, just a club. It is the hardest starting class for most players, and is often described by the community as a test of pure skill. The lore description for the Wretch is minimal, as if even its story is something that has to be built from scratch. 176. The Prisoner starting class wears an iron mask that cannot be removed. The mask is part of the starting equipment, but is treated differently from normal armor. It doesn't appear to be removable for cosmetic purposes, and its item description suggests the prisoner was punished for an unspecified transgression. The crime is never revealed. The mask stays on. 177. The hero starting class is described as a descendant of a chieftain from an eastern land, likely the same culture that produced Godfrey Horror-Lux. This means the hero is, in one reading, distantly related to the first Elden Lord. Whether this is a coincidence within the lore, or a deliberate choice that sets the hero apart from other Tarnished, is not confirmed. 178. The Confessor starting class begins the game with a blue-white cloth cape that is distinctive from any other armor piece in the game. The Confessor's lore describes them as a church spy who killed for the faith. Their elegant starting equipment stands in contrast to the work they did. 1. Reading is that the church outfit is a costume, worn to access places a spy needs to access, while the actual identity of the Confessor is something else entirely. 179. The warrior starting class begins dual-wielding small curved blades. The dual-wielding stance in Elden Ring is called the power stance, and it increases damage output at the cost of the ability to use a shield. The warrior, beginning the game in this stance, communicates something about their philosophy. They have chosen offense over protection, which either reflects confidence or a specific kind of recklessness. 180. The bandit starting class begins with a dagger and a bow and has the highest starting arcane stat of any class. Arcane in Elden Ring governs item discovery, finding more items from enemies, as well as certain blood and death sorceries. The bandit, whose profession is defined by taking things from others, having the stat most associated with finding things, is a small but pointed piece of class design. 181. The golden seeds, which upgrade your sacred flask users, are found near minor Erd trees or dropped by Erd tree avatars. Their physical appearance is that of small amber droplets, like beads of resin. The texture suggests they were secreted by the tree rather than grown, which implies the Erd tree produces them when stressed or injured, like sap from a wound. 182. Sacred tears, which upgrade the potency of your flask, are found inside ruined churches throughout the lands between. Each one rests on a small altar. The implication is that churches in this world collected these tears as sacred objects, perhaps believing they were literal tears of the Erd tree or some divine figure. The quantity of churches destroyed, while their sacred tears remain intact, suggests the tears survived whatever catastrophe claimed the churches. 183. The flask of crimson tears restores health. The flask of cerulean tears restores FP, the magical energy pool. The names use the word tears, not water or magic or energy. This is a deliberate choice. The healing resource is described as something precious, something that was lost and collected, not simply manufactured. 184. The wondrous physic, a special flask that allows for one highly customizable use per rest, accepts crystal tears as ingredients. These tears are found in specific locations, and each one does something different when combined. The resulting mixture can be unique to each player's style. A personalized potion assembled from the world's resources. It's the game's most player-expressive system, and it's also, mechanically, a flask of mixed tears. 185. The stone sword keys used to unlock imp-faced fog walls throughout the game are a non-renewable resource, found in limited quantities or purchasable from merchants at high cost. The decision to use one is always meaningful. What's behind the wall might not be worth the key. This is a design choice that creates genuine hesitation and rewards players who research or take risks. 186. The imp faces on the fog walls have a consistent aesthetic across the entire game. Small stone faces with wide mouths and narrow eyes. They appear on dungeon gates, treasure chests, and sealed passages. They look vaguely mischievous. One of the community's enduring questions is whether the imps designed the lock, or whether someone put the imps' faces on a lock someone else designed. 187. The Crystallians, crystal enemies found in certain dungeons and caves, are described as beings who gave up their flesh in exchange for a crystalline form that is effectively eternal. They move slowly. Their attacks are telegraphed. They are hard. The contrast between their sluggish movement and their extreme durability is consistent with their lore. They gave up vitality for permanence. 188. The Crystal Cave in Liurnia holds an unusual quantity of smithing stones and crystal tears. It's also home to a boss who barely speaks and moves minimally. The cave feels like a preserved space, something kept exactly as it was at a specific moment in the past. The crystal tears within it suggest that whatever crystallizing force created the Crystallians also left evidence of emotional states behind. 189. The Glintstone Craftsman's Cookbook series, which unlocks crafting recipes related to glintstone magic, references a tradition of amateur or independent sorcery, separate from the Academy. Glintstone is described as the crystallized remnants of ancient star matter. Independent craftsmen working with star matter, outside the Academy's oversight, points to a folk tradition of sorcery that the institutional version tried to suppress or absorb. 190. The living jars, lesser versions of the jar characters found as enemies in certain areas, are filled with the compacted remains of warriors. Unlike Alexander, who chose his condition, the smaller living jars seem to be created rather than born. The process by which a jar becomes living is not explained, but the result is a creature that contains something human without being human, which is one of the game's recurring thematic concerns. 191. Erdtree Farms, the golden agricultural lands visible in the Altus Plateau and near Lanedale, still contain workers, living workers, human or near human, who continue farming the golden grain beneath the Erdtree's light, even as the world falls apart. Their persistence is either admirable or a symptom of the Golden Order's conditioning so deep that it continues operating even after the institutional framework has collapsed. 192. The smithing stone deposits, found embedded in cave walls throughout the game, suggest that the ore used to upgrade weapons is not imported, but geological, occurring in the lands between. The fact that specific stone types appear in specific regions, softer smithing stones in early areas, somber stones in more remote regions, implies a geological diversity consistent with a real world and inconsistent with a constructed setting, which raises again the question of whether the lands between grew naturally or was assembled. 193. The dragon temples in Faramazula were apparently sites of religious practice for a dragon-worshipping civilization. Stone slab altars, scattered offerings, and the presence of dragon spirits suggest a fully developed faith tradition now reduced to ruins. This civilization predated the Erdtree. Their gods are still present in the space, whether as bosses or environmental spirits, while their worshippers are gone. 194. The beastmen enemies found in Faramazula are described as servants of the dragons. They are not fully human, with digitigrade legs and elongated limbs, but they wear armor and use weapons in a way that implies cultural sophistication. One reading is that the dragon civilization included non-dragon members who were integrated into its society, rather than serving as simple animals. 195. Gransax's ancient dragon, the giant spear embedded in Lanedale's cityscape, is not the weapon used to kill Gransax. It is Gransax's own weapon, scaled to a dragon's size, and now used as a monument or warning. The detail that the spear belonged to the dragon and was turned into a memorial of the dragon's defeat suggests a civilization that thought carefully about what to do with the instruments of history. 196. The bolt of Gransax's weapon, which can be retrieved from this enormous spear, is a legendary item with extremely limited quantities and high usefulness. Finding it requires not just reaching the spear, but navigating a route that the map doesn't clearly indicate. It's one of the game's most hidden legendary items, and also one of the most visually satisfying to wield, because you're throwing a weapon the size of a lightning bolt. 197. Ancient Dragon Lanciax appears in two locations in the Altus Plateau and mountain tops. A dragon who dives at you from above in an open field. She is associated with red lightning, rather than the more common golden lightning associated with Gransax. The colour difference suggests a different origin or different divine affiliation within the dragon civilization itself. 198. Dragon Cult Prayer Books, which expand the selection of lightning incantations available to the player, describe a tradition of humans who adopted dragon worship after the dragons and the ancient lords formed an alliance. Human dragon worshippers coexisted with the dragon civilization long enough to develop their own theological texts and prayer traditions. The alliance eventually broke down, but the faith persisted. 199. The Claw Talisman, which increases the power of jump attacks, depicts a creature mid-leap on its surface. Jump attacks in Elden Ring feel distinctly satisfying because the game's animation system gives them a weightiness that regular attacks sometimes lack. The deliberate choice to create a talisman that rewards this specific move suggests the developers wanted players to experiment with the jump attack and considered it an underutilized option. 200. The Radagon Icon Talisman shortens casting times for spells and incantations. Its description reveals that Radagon himself had a natural talent for both sorcery and holy magic simultaneously, which was considered impossible by the Academy's standards. His ability to transcend the division between magic types is one of several details that distinguish him as an exceptional being, separate from the strange truth about his relationship with Marika. 201. Radagon's relationship with Marika is one of the most discussed pieces of lore in the game. They are the same person. Radagon is Marika's male half, separated and given independent agency at some point in the past. The exact mechanism of this split is never fully explained. The two of them married and had children, while simultaneously being one person, which the game presents as a divine paradox rather than a logical impossibility. 202. The two children of Marika and Radagon, Liurnia and Miquella, are described as having divine properties that are the consequence of their parents' paradoxical nature. Liurnia is goddess of rot. Miquella is the Empyrean capable of becoming a new god. Both of them are marked from birth by divine influence, and both of them suffer for it. The suggestion is that being born from a god who is also two people is an experience that leaves mark. 203. The two fingers communicate through finger readers like Enya, who interpret their gestures. Their messages are not verbal. This means all of the guidance the two fingers offer passes through an interpreter. 1. Reading is that the two fingers' actual intent is never directly conveyed, only interpreted, which creates room for misunderstanding at the very foundation of the Golden Order's guidance system. 204. The three fingers communicate through fire and madness. Their contact is described as overwhelming, consuming the mind of anyone who directly receives their presence. The contrast between the two fingers' mediated, bureaucratic communication and the three fingers' direct, devastating contact suggests two fundamentally different philosophies about how divine will should interface with human minds. 205. The Tarnished can be granted the flame of frenzy by the three fingers in the subterranean shunning grounds. The process involves removing all of your clothing, all of your armor, and walking to the doors naked. This is an unusual game design choice that is also thematically coherent. You cannot carry the frenzied flame while carrying anything of the world's existing order. 206. The Frenzied Flame ending. The Lord of Frenzied Flame shows the player character burning the Erd Tree and then the entire lands between with golden orange flame, unmaking the world to prevent any future attempt at divine order. It is not presented as villainous. It is presented as inevitable, the logical conclusion of encountering something so much larger than any individual agenda. 207. The only way to reverse course after receiving the Frenzied Flame is to complete Millicent's questline and receive her needle, then use it in Liurnia's arena to purge the Three Fingers mark. This cure exists inside one of the hardest boss fights in the game. Whether the difficulty is intentional as a statement about how hard it is to escape certain commitments is a question the game enjoys not answering. 208. Marika's words, heard in the final room before the last boss, describe the shattering of the Elden Ring as an act she committed willingly. She says the ring is now her lord's. Whether she means this as a statement of finality or an invitation is ambiguous. Her imprisonment inside the Erd Tree means her words come from a place of profound constraint, which makes determining her true intent nearly impossible. 209. The Elden Ring's name itself is never explained. It is not a ring you can wear. It is not a physical circle in the traditional sense. It's described as a binding of runes, a collection of fundamental laws. The word ring suggests a closed loop, a completed circuit. One interpretation is that the ring was broken not just physically, but philosophically, that the closed circuit of the world's order was interrupted, and the entire game is what happens to a world when its fundamental laws become suggestions rather than requirements. 210. The tarnished's ability to use the Elden Ring's power at the end of the game to mend it, alter it, or destroy it is described as an act that requires both the power of the runes and the player's own will. You are not a chosen one in the traditional sense. You were not born with a destiny. You arrived because you were called. And what you do when you get there is yours to decide. This is the game's central philosophical offering: agency in a world that has run out of predetermined outcomes. 211. The stone sword key mechanism revisited. The doors sealed by imp fog walls are described in one item lore entry as doors that will only open for those the imps judge as worthy. The stone sword key doesn't force the door. It satisfies a requirement. One reading is that the imps are not obstacles but gatekeepers with an actual standard, and the key is a symbol of meeting that standard rather than bypassing it. 212. The Knights' Cavalry, mounted spectral knights who roam the roads after dark, do not appear during the day. They patrol specific roads in specific regions, and their patrol routes can be learned through observation. Players who learn these routes can either avoid the Knights' Cavalry entirely or intercept them for their loot. The game rewards the attention this learning requires with items that are meaningfully good. 213. The lore of the Knights' Cavalry describes them as the knights of a king who wandered eternal night. Their patrol of the roads suggests they have not stopped looking for something, or perhaps have not stopped performing the ritual of the patrol, even though whatever purpose the patrol served has long since become irrelevant. 214. Margit's Shackle, an item that can briefly immobilize Margit the Fellowman in his boss fight, is sold by Patches. This is the first time in the game that Patches offers you something genuinely useful at reasonable cost. The timing, which aligns with most players' first major difficulty spike, is probably intentional. Patches may be a trickster, but he knows his market. 215. The Walking Mausoleum in the Weeping Peninsula only duplicates remembrances associated with bosses who were defeated with their great rune intact. This mechanic connects remembrance duplication to a system of spiritual completeness. The mausoleum can only copy a death that was complete. A death that left something behind cannot be reproduced in the same way. 216. Remembrances themselves, the items left by major bosses, can either be exchanged for unique weapons or incantations, or consumed directly for runes. The choice is irreversible within a given playthrough. Consuming a remembrance is, in a sense, destroying a piece of history for immediate gain. The game puts this choice in front of the player without judgment, and many players only realize what they destroyed after it's too late. 217. Godric's Great Rune, when equipped and activated, increases all player stats temporarily. It is described as the most coveted of all great runes within the game's world, despite Godric being the most mocked of the demigods. One reading is that the rune itself is powerful because it is a fragment of the Elden Ring, and its worth is inherent regardless of who held it. The carrier's dignity has no bearing on what the ring chose to give them. 218. Radahn's Great Rune raises the player's maximum HP, FP, and stamina. It is the most broadly useful of the Great Runes for general combat. Radahn, in the lore, was defined by his physical might and endurance, which makes his rune's effects a direct expression of what he valued. The connection between a person's character and the power their rune grants is consistent across all the demigods. 219. Morgit's Great Rune raises maximum HP by a substantial amount. Morgit is Leyndal's protector, the true omen who spent his life defending a city and a system that considered him cursed at birth. His rune, which makes you harder to kill, fits a character who endured enormous suffering without breaking. The game doesn't comment on this connection. It simply is. 220. Rykard's Great Rune, when activated, restores a small amount of HP with each enemy kill. The serpent that Rykard merged with was described as a devourer. The great rune he leaves behind gives you something for everything you consume. The digestion of enemies becomes nourishing in a very literal mechanical sense. 221. Liurnia's great rune is the only one that cannot be activated through a rune arc, the consumable required for all other great runes. It requires being at the location of a stake of Marika to activate, and it provides no stat bonus. Instead, it allows the player to regain HP with each hit landed, mirroring Liurnia's own boss mechanic. Using her rune against her boss fight is a form of symmetry that players discovered and celebrated. 222. Miquella's great rune cannot be used at all. It has no activation. Its item description says it is a perfect rune that was meant to become a new order, but remains eternally immature. Miquella could not finish his work before Mog took him. His rune sits in the player's inventory, inert, a reminder that potential and completion are different things. 223. The Mohgwyn Palace, Mohg's domain, is reached through two different routes. One involves completing Vari's questline, during which Vari, the first NPC who speaks to you in Limgrave, guides you toward Mog's service. The other involves finding a hidden waygate in the consecrated snowfield. The two paths are mechanically very different in difficulty and tone, which suggests From Software wanted both accessibility and discovery as options. 224. Var, whose full name is White Mask Var, begins his questline by insulting the player character for not having guidance. He calls you maidenless, which has become one of the most quoted lines in the game's community. His arc involves him initially presenting himself as a friendly advisor before revealing he serves Mohg. The insult at the start, in retrospect, is from someone who considers divine grace important and is testing whether you'll be useful. 225. The Dynasty Mausoleum in Mohgwyn Palace contains a boss called Mohgwyn himself, but also contains dozens of Albinaurics, pale humanoid creatures, who were brought there in a blood ritual. Mohg was feeding them to the formless mother in exchange for power. The Albinaurics in the palace are in various states of completion in this ritual. Some appear to have been there for a very long time. 226. The Albinaurics are a race created through sorcery rather than natural reproduction. They were made deliberately. As a people, their creators are not named. Their purpose in being created is not stated. They exist as a community with their own culture and traditions, despite having been brought into existence by someone else's will. One reading is that the fact of being made doesn't determine the quality of existence that follows. Another is that it does, and the Albinauric's suffering under Mohg is evidence of the original creator's carelessness. 227. The Latenna, the Albinauric Spirit Ash, one of the best ranged Spirit Ashes in the game, comes from an Albinauric archer who asked the player to carry her to the Halig tree so her people could reach safety. She is already dead when you acquire her ash, but her spirit continues pursuing the mission she had in life. Completing her quest line involves reaching the Halig tree, at which point her spirit indicates that she has accomplished her purpose. The sadness of this, a person's ghost finishing a journey the person couldn't, is played completely quietly. 228. The Shrimp Man, a term coined by the community for the minor enemy called a grafted scion, is the first enemy encountered after the opening cutscene in the tutorial area. It cannot be defeated without considerable difficulty at the beginning of the game. Most players die to it immediately. Its purpose is to teach you that dying in Elden Ring is normal and acceptable. The tutorial begins with an intentional failure. 229. The grafted scions themselves are humanoid creatures assembled from multiple human bodies, lesser versions of Godric's aesthetic, translated into enemy form. They appear at certain locations outside of Godric's territory, which implies either that Godric's methods spread or that grafting was practiced by someone predating him. Item lore for the grafted scion is deliberately sparse. 230. The Fellowmen, the class of creature that includes Margit and Morgott, are described as beings born with a call, an inner face beneath the outer one. Their true nature is concealed behind a mask they wear constantly. Margit's staff, cloak, and elderly appearance are a disguise, Morgott. Beneath his crown and robes is a horned omen who has spent his entire life performing a version of humanity he wasn't born with. 231. Morgott's second phase transformation, which reveals his omen form and introduces his full arsenal, is one of the more emotionally complicated boss moments in the game. The person you've been fighting, the self-appointed protector of Leyndell who fought in full armor with a disciplined style, sheds that persona when pushed hard enough. What's underneath is older and angrier. Whether this is a loss of control or a return to his true self is open to interpretation. 232. The omens who are killed at birth, per the law, are not always actually killed. Some are abandoned, some escape. Morgott escaped and returned as Leyndell's guardian. His loyalty to a city that would have killed him for what he was is the most extreme example of self-suppression in the game. He protected them anyway. He is one of the most tragic figures in the entire cast when you understand what he was doing and why. 233. Mohg's full name is Mohg, Lord of Blood, and he is Morgott's twin. The two of them are the product of the same birth curse. One chose to protect the system that would have killed him. The other chose to found his own dynasty in direct opposition to it. They are the same being, taking opposite paths from the same starting point, which is one of the most elegantly constructed character contrasts in the game. 234. The cardinal sin incantation, found in the Church of the Plague in Caelid, is described as a spell developed by a finger maiden who abandoned her faith. Using it causes the player to take damage. It is not useful in combat. It exists as a statement, a piece of lore made functional as a reminder of what it costs to reject divine guidance, rendered as a button you can press to hurt yourself. 235. The Clean Rot armor set, belonging to Malenia's knights, has item descriptions that note the armorer made deliberate aesthetic choices to honor the scarlet rot that would eventually consume the wearers. The armor was designed to look beautiful in the context of what it signified. Someone who knew what the rot would do built armor to complement it. That is either devotion or a very particular kind of art. 236. Elden Ring's weapon classes each have their own moveset aesthetic. Colossal swords swing slowly and have wild, overshooting follow-through. Daggers are small, fast, and rely on rapid succession. Halberds have wide sweeps that account for crowd control. The physical logic of each weapon type is grounded in how those weapons actually function in real-world fighting traditions, then amplified to match the game's fantasy context. 237. The twin-blade weapon class, which features bladed weapons on both ends of a staff, doesn't have an exact historical parallel, but draws from martial arts traditions that use double-bladed staffs and Naginata pairs. Their spinning attacks in the game suggest a flow-state fighting style that the lore doesn't attach to any specific faction, but which appears in multiple locations across the world, implying it's a personal tradition rather than a cultural one. 238. The flail weapons, spiked weights on chains, have a wild and unpredictable swing pattern that makes them both effective and risky. Their item descriptions rarely comment on the flail itself, but often on whoever is carrying it. Flails in Elden Ring seem to belong to characters who don't follow conventional fighting doctrine, which suits a world where convention has largely broken down. The whips, a small weapon class, deal no poise damage and have limited range. They are objectively worse than most alternatives in almost every combat scenario. Players who use them effectively are considered technically impressive by the community because the weapon's limitations require solving problems that other weapons don't create. The community occasionally refers to whip-only challenge runs as evidence of the game's depth, because a limited weapon in a deep system still generates interesting decisions. 240. The Erd Tree Seal, a sacred seal used to cast incantations, scales entirely with faith. Its description notes that the Erd Tree itself functions as the seal's focal point. This means when you cast incantations with it, you are channeling divine will through a physical object that represents a tree. The chain of representation, tree to seal to spell to effect, is a compressed version of how religious ritual generally functions. 241. The Dragon Communion Seal scales with both faith and arcane. It's designed for characters who blend incantation use with Dragon Communion spells. The fact that a seal exists specifically to accommodate this hybrid approach suggests that the dragon-worshipping tradition within the game had practitioners who developed both magical and clerical skills simultaneously, before the Golden Order's systematization would have discouraged mixing traditions. 242. The Frenzied Flame Seal, used to cast incantations associated with the frenzy, scales with all three casting stats at reduced efficiency compared to dedicated seals. This reflects the theological nature of the Frenzied Flame. It does not care about specialization. It takes everything and rewards commitment to breadth rather than depth, which is consistent with its role as a force that rejects categorization. 243. The Staff of the Avatar, found deep in the Halig tree, belonged to a being of enormous size. Its default length, when wielded by a player character, extends far beyond their body. Whatever creature used this staff comfortably was substantially larger than a human, which speaks to the scale of the beings that Miquella gathered at the Halig tree. The sanctuary was not designed for ordinary-sized people alone. 244. The Carian Regal Scepter, Renala's staff, has a moon motif on its top and is one of the most powerful intelligence scaling staves in the game. Its connection to Renala's power is explicit, but the fact that it can be obtained at all through trading her remembrance raises the question of whether it was always separate from her, or whether trading her memory creates it from that memory retroactively. 245. The meteorite staff found early in Caelid has fixed scaling and cannot be upgraded, but its intelligence scaling is strong enough at acquisition to carry most early to mid-game sorcery builds. It was clearly placed where it is, as a gift to players who explore Caelid early, a high-risk area rewarding early exploration, with a tool that reduces risk for the playstyle most likely to have led you there. 246. The Wing of Astel weapon, a curved sword that fires nebula projectiles, is found after navigating the deepest part of a cave system in Liurnia. Its lore connects it to the Astel creature, a starborn being that fell to Earth in a vessel of stone. The weapon feels alien compared to most others in the game, which is appropriate. It was made from something that was never native to the lands between. 247. Astel, natural born of the void, is a boss encountered in two separate locations. The first Astel guards the passage to the Lake of Rot. The second, Astel Stars of Darkness, is in the Mogwin Caves. The two Astels are not identical in their abilities, which raises the question of whether they are the same creature in two places or different creatures of the same type. Lore suggests there may be many Astels, each one a fragment of something vast. 248. The Lake of Rot, which is precisely what it sounds like, fills the floor of a vast underground cavern below Liurnia. The rot here is slow-acting but constant. There is no way to cross without either immunity gear or extremely quick navigation. At the far end is a coffin that, when interacted with, carries you down even deeper. The lake is not the bottom, there is always a lower level. 249. The Grand Cloister beyond the Lake of Rot leads to Astel's lair, but also contains clean rot knights in an area far from Melinia's sanctum. One reading is that this region was once connected to Melinia's territory through underground passages, and the clean rot knights extended their patrol routes here. Another reading is that the Scarlet Rot itself, as a living force, drew Melinia's servants toward its source. 250. The Crucible Knot Talisman, which increases poise, is connected to the Crucible, which is established earlier is the primordial state of life in the lands between. Poise in Elden Ring determines whether you stagger when hit. Higher poise means you keep swinging through impacts. The talisman, that increases poise being rooted in the oldest form of life, suggests that the most ancient beings simply didn't flinch. They were too fundamental to be destabilized. 251. The Great Shield Soldiers, those ghostly soldiers found around the Divine Tower of Limgrave, carry tower shields that are larger than their bodies. They appear in spectral form, suggesting they died in place during a siege or defense. The fact that they still hold their shields in death implies that their purpose to protect the tower became inseparable from their identity. 252. The divine towers, which exist in each major region and restore the power of their region's associated great rune when visited, are connected to the Erd tree by bridges of golden light that only become visible when the right conditions are met. The towers are described as fingers pointing at the sky, built to maintain communication between the mortal world and the divine order above it. 253. The finger ruins. Scattered across the most remote areas of the lands between, and apparently referencing enormous hands reaching from the earth, appear on the map as curiosities that the game does not explain. They are too large to have been built. They appear to have grown or emerged. One reading suggests they are evidence of an attempt by the greater will to reach directly into the world, which was stopped before completion. 254. The player can find messages from a character named Shabiri Grape, pardon the redundancy, left as messages near the Three Fingers entrance. These messages suggest that someone paved a path of guidance toward the frenzied flame, in the same way that the Two Fingers Grace guides toward the Erd tree. Someone wanted to make it easy to find the Three Fingers. Whether this is an act of evangelism or manipulation depends on your reading of the frenzied flame's nature. 255. The High Road Cave in Limgrave contains an Albinauric village deep within it, populated by second-generation Albinaurics who have partially devolved into wolf-like forms. Their appearance is described as a consequence of the magical imperfections in their creation. They live in the cave, away from a world that considers them less than human. Their presence in a literal underworld that nobody else visits is a quiet piece of world-building about what happens to communities that are failed by their creators. 256. The Albinauric rise in the consecrated snowfield requires solving a puzzle involving summoning 3 sheep to a specific location. The sheep are spectral. They appear when the correct conditions are met. There is no indicator that this is the solution until you try it. From Software embedded a puzzle into an area that rewards exploration, with a tower that teaches you something about Albinauric history that no NPC ever explains. 257. The consecrated snowfield is an optional area of the game that many players never find. Reaching it requires completing 2 separate tasks that are not explicitly connected in the game's quest log, because there is no quest log. Its hidden status means the entire area, including the Halig tree, is frequently missed on first playthroughs, and its lore about Mikella and the Albinaurics remains undiscovered for many players. 258. Ordina, the liturgical town in the consecrated snowfield, is a ghost town similar to Celia. Its ghostly enemies are armed with bows and hunt the player on sight. To progress through the town, you must light 4 flames on 4 statues while being actively hunted. The tension of this sequence, navigating a town where invisible archers can kill you at any moment, creates a feeling of vulnerability that the open world rarely produces. 259. The Evergale system. Those magical prisons scattered across the lands between, each contain a single powerful enemy. The player can choose to enter them voluntarily. No NPC sends you there. No quest requires them. They are entirely optional combat challenges, with lore attached to the imprisoned being. One reading of the Evergale system is that it represents the Golden Order's incarceration of anyone sufficiently powerful and threatening, kept alive in suspended punishment, rather than killed and mourned. 260. Bloodhound Knight, Darrywill, imprisoned in the forlorn hound Evergale, in Limgrave, is connected to Blade's questline. Blade will help you fight Darrywill if you ask him. This is one of the earliest examples of NPC cooperation in a boss fight, and it's thematically fitting that the Wolfman helps you fight the Dogman. They are visually similar enough that the contrast between them is clearly intentional. The ancient hero of Zamor, imprisoned in another Evergale, wields frost and is described as a warrior from an ancient culture connected to the giants. The frost magic associated with the giant culture is different from the more conventional cold spells found elsewhere in the game. Zamor specifically is referenced in item names, suggesting an entire civilization's name has been preserved only in the names of those who escaped it or were imprisoned from it. 262. The crucible aspect of the breath incantation, which breathes fire in the manner of an ancient dragon, is described as one of the oldest incantations in existence. The image of a human breathing fire through a connection to the primordial crucible is connected to real-world myths about the boundary between human and dragon being porous, navigated by shamans or priests who could temporarily embody the other. 263. The frenzied burst sorcery, which fires a sustained beam of madness, is one of the few offensive frenzied flame abilities that are practically useful in combat. Its item lore describes it as drawing on the flame's power to burn away the veil between sanity and madness. The visual effect, a slow-growing beam of pale fire that staggers and damages simultaneously, suggests something more surgical than the chaotic fire generally associated with the three fingers. 264. The Stars of Ruin sorcery fires 12 projectiles that chase enemies around corners and through obstacles. Its description references the sorcerer Lusat and his understanding of stars as individually willed entities. If each star has its own will, then the Stars of Ruin are not simply missiles but beings with purpose. They chase because they want to arrive. This interpretation makes the spell feel different to use. 265. Cerulean Hidden Tear, one of the crystal tears that can go into the wondrous physic, negates all FP consumption for a short period. It was found in a region where an ancient god of sorcery is said to have wept. The tear, in its lore, is the residue of that divine sorrow. Using it to cast spells without limit is, in one reading, using someone's grief as a resource, which is an uncomfortable transaction the game presents without commentary. 266. The ruptured crystal tear causes the physic flask to explode after a short delay, dealing massive damage. It is a trap disguised as a useful item, unless you know what it does. Players who drink it, expecting restoration, and instead explode, have had one of the game's most memorable surprise deaths. This exists as an option in the game because From Software includes items that punish curiosity, while also rewarding it, and the community's shared experience of this explosion has become part of the game's social memory. 267. The Erd Tree Seal revisited. Incantations cast through it feel heavier than those cast through other seals. This is a subjective quality that players in the community have discussed at length, and it's partially a product of the spell animations, but also possibly of how the casting sound effects are tuned for the Erd Tree Seal specifically. Whether this was intentional or an emergent consequence of the audio design is unknown. 268. The Church of Vows in Eastern Liurnia allows you to atone for aggressive actions toward NPCs, specifically killing them or attacking them until they became hostile. The atonement mechanism requires a celestial due, a rare item. The existence of this system implies that the world's moral accounting is correctable, that even the severest relational damage can be undone with the right material. Whether this is comforting or slightly mercenary is a matter of perspective. 269. The Turtle Pope, as the community calls the giant turtle NPC Miriel, Pastor of Vows, resides at the Church of Vows and will teach you any incantation or sorcery you give him, without judgment. He is enormous, ancient, and entirely benevolent. His characterization is one of the warmest in the game. He has been at the church a very long time, and does not appear to have a hidden agenda. He is simply there, learning and teaching, in a world where most other beings have schemes. 270. Muriel's item description, when you receive his bell bearing after he dies, describes him as a faithful servant who waited at the church for an uncountable number of years. He was placed there and did his duty until he died. The simplicity of this, a person doing exactly what they were meant to do for as long as they could, is presented without irony. In a game full of ambition, betrayal, and catastrophe, Muriel is simply faithful. 271. The fallen ruins of the lake in Liurnia contain partially submerged structures that appear to have once been substantial buildings. The lake itself is implied to have risen over what was once dry land, or structures were built in water, depending on which reading of the Liurnia timeline you find more persuasive. Either way, the ruins below the waterline are accessible by diving, and they contain item placements that suggest someone remembered they were there. 272. The revenant enemies that teleport aggressively and deal rapid poison damage are described as remnants of an ancient magic gone wrong. Their teleportation is not graceful, it looks desperate. They move like something that is in pain and cannot stop moving. One reading is that the teleportation isn't a power they control, but a condition they're trapped in, bouncing between locations without the ability to simply stand still. 273. The Black Knife Titch Spirit Ash, acquired at the end of a boss fight against a Black Knife assassin, summons a fast-moving assassin who deals destined death damage. She is one of the most powerful ashes in the game. Her lore describes her as the daughter of Electo, who was the leader of the Black Knife conspiracy. Whether Titch participated in the Night of the Black Knives or was too young is not specified, but her loyalty to her mother, carried into death, is part of her characterization. 274. The Knight's Cavalry set, acquired by killing Knight's Cavalry enemies at specific locations, contains a cape that the community frequently cites as one of the better-looking pieces of equipment in the game. It was clearly designed with care. The Knight's Cavalry themselves, being spectral, technically don't need equipment. The fact that they have it, that they appear fully armored, even in their ghostly state, suggests their self-image is inseparable from their role as mounted knights. 275. The Rotten Crystal Sword, one of many weapons found in Caelid, deals both scarlet rot and physical damage simultaneously. Its description says it was crystallized by the rot's influence, suggesting the weapon was an ordinary sword before the rot affected it, and the crystallization was an unexpected consequence. The weapon, being improved by catastrophe, is in the context of Caelid's tragedy, a dark kind of irony. 276. The Smithing Stone Bell Bearings, acquired from killing Crystal Tunnels bosses or finding them in dungeons, allow you to purchase smithing stones directly from the Twin Maiden husks at the Round Table Hold. Before finding these bearings, upgrading weapons requires finding stones in the world. After finding them, it becomes a commercial transaction. The transition from resource scarcity to resource commerce mirrors a larger theme in the game about what happens to a society when its foundational scarcities are resolved. 277. The Twin Maiden husks, the shopkeepers at the Round Table Hold, are described as the empty shells of finger maidens who have lost their tarnished. They continue their duties without purpose, selling to anyone who approaches. Their situation is one of the game's quiet devastations. Beings who exist entirely in relation to something that is no longer there, still performing the function of that relationship because they have no other way to exist. 278. Bell bearings dropped by NPCs include the specific inventory of that NPC. If you kill a merchant, their bell bearing can be given to the Twin Maiden husks, and the husks will sell everything that merchant previously sold. The economy of the Round Table Hold absorbs the knowledge of every merchant you kill, converting murder into commerce, which is either efficient or deeply uncomfortable. 279. Caelay's bell bearing, if you kill merchant Caelay, gives his entire inventory to the husks. This includes the spirit calling bell, which Caelay gives you for free if you haven't received it yet. Killing Caelay is one of the worst things you can do economically and socially in the early game. The game doesn't warn you. It trusts you to either know better or learn. 280. The cookbook series of items throughout the game unlocks crafting recipes. Some of these cookbooks are written by named figures, others are anonymous. The variety of authors and traditions in the cookbook system suggests that practical knowledge in the lands between came from many sources and was passed around in physical form. Libraries burned, recipes survived. 281. The Missionaries' Cookbook series is associated with the Golden Order's efforts to spread its faith, that a religious organization distributed recipes alongside theology suggests the Order understood that practical assistance builds more loyalty than doctrine alone. The recipes themselves are functional in combat. Pots, boluses, Greece, the Golden Order's missionaries were also apparently combat trainers. 282. The Shabriri's Woe Talisman, which causes all nearby enemies to target the player, is named for the man who drew all humanity's curse into himself. The talisman's function, making yourself the target of all hostility so that others don't have to be, is a direct mechanical translation of Shabriri's mythological act. It is one of the most consistent law-to-mechanic translations in the game. 283. The Concealing Veil Talisman, which obscures your location when crouching, is described as being made from fragments of the Nox civilization's obscuring magic. The Nox who built Nokron and Nokstella are described as a people who were exiled to underground darkness for reasons that are not fully explained. A civilization defined by having been hidden gives birth to a talisman that hides you. The material culture of the persecuted becomes a tool of concealment. 284. The Nox Flowing Hammer and related Nox weapons have a distinctive silver, mercury-like appearance. The Nox were associated with silver and with the concept of flowing form, materials that can change shape. Their architecture in Nokron and Nokstella reflects this, curving and molded rather than rigid. A civilization that valued fluid form over fixed structure chose aesthetic principles that were consistent from their weapons to their buildings. 285. The Nokstella, Eternal City, is deeper underground than Nokron. To reach it, you must pass through the Lake of Rot. Its architecture is larger, more formal, and less damaged than Nokron.